that things will happen the way you want them to.
Okay. So we've talked about now the minor children. What are some thoughts about adult children and children from previous marriages? Now we're sort of opening Pandora's box, so I know that we can't get into all the details, but maybe if we can hit a few highlights.
Yeah, well, another important reason for estate planning, as I said, for good written estate planning, is because when you have people who are not in their first marriage, they're in their second or third marriage, which is not unusual, and they have children from different marriages, prior marriages, oftentimes adult children, they're going to have certain expectations about what they're going to receive. You also have a spouse, let's assume, there's a case where you have a husband and a wife. So spouses are concerned about taking care of one another, but they also have these children that have certain expectations and that they probably want to provide something for. So, with an estate plan, you can do things like that. Mm-hmm. You could even have a trust again in your will for your spouse, and then going on to your adult children.
So one thing, I've been through now a couple of these myself as a trustee or executor, and with the children from the previous marriage, in many cases, what I've come to the philosophy of is, although we quite often provide Q-tip trusts and other things, in other words, to sort of keep the assets aside for the spouse's use during their lifetime,
right.
with the remainder to the children. But in a lot of cases, I think they'd be better off if the kids got a separate inheritance, right, and then the spouse had their inheritance, and sort of
right,
keep them apart, because it keeps the conflict.
Right. There are different ways of doing that. People have all different kinds of things in mind when they come to see me. Sometimes they'll come to me and they'll have 3 pieces of real estate, and they say they want house A to go to these people, house B to go to. Well, I try to discourage that because you don't really know what you're going to own when you pass away. So it may not turn out right.
Yes.
So I'd rather have people try to do it in terms of percentages,
Shares.
but sometimes they can't.
Yeah.
But there are other ways you can provide for children, because there are assets that you might be able to leave to people by what's referred to as a beneficiary designation. So you might have a life insurance policy,
Right,
that you establish especially for the purpose of taking care of children from a prior marriage. And again, you can do that on any percentages you want, amounts you want. You can even do this somewhat with things like retirement benefits, although there are some down income tax sides, as you know, to leaving it to children as opposed to your spouse. But again, if that's what you have and that's what you want to do, sometimes people will not let the tax issues be the tail that wags the dog. They will still do it, because they want to make sure it happens that way.
Right.
So there are ways of doing estate planning that aren't directly involved in the will, but you have to take all of these things into consideration when you're doing an estate plan. What are the assets, and what types of assets are they? Do they have beneficiary designations, etc.
Okay. And another thing that we talked about that was really important in general for families, but maybe even more so in some respects, like I said, with the children, because part of what's the peacekeeper, the person that's sort of keeping things together, is in many cases this decedent or whatever. But if they can have a communication during their lifetime, in other words, if everybody's getting together around the table, they're having what we sometimes call family councils, or whatever, where they sort of talk out some of these issues, talk about wishes and values and so forth. That in itself can be very valuable.
Right. It can be very useful. It also is something you have to be very careful with, because as an attorney, you don't want to have the estate plan being decided by a board of directors sort of thing. So it's good for people to communicate and know what's going to happen. It's good for the lawyer to have a relationship with the client where the client is telling them what they want.
Yes.
And doing what the client wants to have done. So there's a balance that needs to be struck there, but communication is always important.
Yeah, okay. Need to move on. How could you be hurt tax-wise if you don't have a will or a trust?
Well, we're talking here primarily about, there's estate tax issues, and usually that's done through a trust. So you do estate planning with trust to assure that you get credits that apply to estates, estate tax credits, etc. And to make sure you get something called a marital deduction, to get all these things combined and have a minimal amount of federal estate tax to pay. So that can be done in a will as well, a testamentary trust, but it's usually done in what's called a living trust. These rules are changing a lot, as you know, because we're getting into a very strange period here where the tax laws are changing as of January 1st.
Right.
But we won't go into all that. There also are some income tax issues involved. One of the things that happens when a person dies is you get a new basis in property, a stepped-up basis.
Right.
And you need to be careful about how you do things to make sure that you get that full basis increase.
Yeah, so when we talk about basis, we're talking about the cost that you use when you sell something on your income tax forms. And so historically, the basis has been the fair market value on the date of death, or 6 months later, which we call an alternate valuation date. And what is happening for 2010 is that we're getting a new regime where we have what we call carryover basis. And so it's the decedent's basis that will apply for the property, but there is an exception where there's an election that can be made. And so a portion of the property you can step up.
Right. It's
so
very complicated.
Yeah, so I don't want to get into all the details, but you do want to see your advisor or attorney related to these details. And this is part of why I'm saying everybody may need to have their will looked at for this year, especially if you're in a situation where you're in declining health or something like that, and you're worried something like might happen more imminently in the year.
Right.
But even then, we never know when something might happen. Okay. Where should you keep your will?
I believe people should keep their will in a safe deposit box. There's a lot of different things that people do. Some attorneys keep them. I don't believe in that. Mm-hmm. Some people keep them at home, but houses burn down. People get into your home and if they don't like what your will says, they can remove it. So because you can actually get into a safe deposit box after a person dies to get the estate planning documents out, I think that's the safest place to keep them.
Okay.
And that's what I advise my clients.
Okay, good. All right, well, we're getting to be close to out of time here, so do you have maybe some other thoughts related to this whole area of why you need a will, or maybe a summation? Or
Well, I just think the importance of this conversation is that people realize, I mean, I think everybody does realize it's important to do this, but just getting motivated to do it. And it shouldn't take a special thing to motivate you to do it. If it's something like illness, it may be too late. Sometimes people lose capacity.
Yes.
And they can't do it anymore. So
Right.
it's not that hard, and it's not that expensive to do an estate plan, especially with wills. And so I would really, urge people to do it rather than just think about it.
Right. Okay, Bill. Well, as I said, we're close to getting out of time here. So mostly I want to thank you very much.
My pleasure.
And we are going to be having another interview here shortly for the next program. But anyway, again, folks, if you haven't taken care of this, I hope you'll take it to heart, think about these matters and some of the issues that we've talked about. And I hope to see you next time on Financial Insider Weekly.